What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be finishing up our Hurtbox episodes for now. There isn't much more that we'll have to do after this with Hurtboxes, but we will have to adjust some things using data tables in the future, or an entire database if we choose, to actually make this work for every animation, every attack, all those sort of things. So, what we're doing today is we're going to be modifying all of our Hurtboxes to work with our animation. So you can see as I crouch, my Hurtboxes change. I have the ability to enable or disable them. So while I'm standing, you can see I have the head Hurtbox, the mid Hurtbox, and the low Hurtbox, and they are all green. The blue Hurtbox is the throw box, so it's where throws will land if they collide with, and the yellow box, we're calling it the push box or the collision box. It's basically where the actual collision of the character is. So we're going to be working with changing all of these today, being able to enable or disable them. So when I'm crouching, you can see I only have my head Hurtbox, which we're calling the high Hurtbox, and my mid Hurtbox, which is the green one that covers my whole body. My low one was actually disabled. The others were moved to fit, and we resized them and again moved them, and then we allow each state to have the right Hurtboxes. Now, we don't have it for every attack so far, and this is because this would normally be done on a frame by frame, or if it's a longer animation, an interpolated basis. Okay, so what I mean by this is when an animation is made in a fighting game, whether it be 2D or 3D, often the attacks are only a few frames, which we've already talked about, and how we're going to be decreasing the number of frames in our animations. But the number of frames isn't too important here. The important part is the frames themselves, or every couple of frames, the Hurtbox data needs to change. When I perform this attack, the mutant actually steps forward to do this elbow. But the Hurtboxes and the push box and the throw box, they don't actually change with this. Now, it has nothing to do with root motion or anything in this case. It's more the fact that we don't have any data to change it. Now, we can manually go in and modify all of this data. After today's episode, you'll be able to make this work for every animation if you'd like. However, one thing we need to do, and it's the only way I see this working is with, again, data tables or a database, is for basically every animation, we need to know how many frames it is and how many times the Hurtboxes are going to change and where they're going to change to. This is usually set up on the animations itself. This is done by game designers, technical designers. It can change depending on where you work and things like that. But from my experience, that's what I've seen. It's done on an animation basis. And this is also because, think of when you perform an attack. We have our, our startup, our active, and our recovery. Well, we can't necessarily automate this to where, the hand itself is the only part that has the Hurtbox. If it collides, then it does damage. You can do that to handle the damage, and you can just disable it once the attack is done, and that's fine. But if you want these Hurtboxes that change with your character, some attacks are different. Some attacks have a wind-up, some attacks have a charge, some attacks have a point where they become inactive in the middle and active again, like a second hit. There's all these different cases, and we can't really automate all of those because the game has no way to know what attack is going to do what. It's more of, we have to know based off of the reason the move is in the game, whether it be the design behind the move or the animation itself, whatever. So, long story short, the reason I'm saying all that, we do have to have one more Hurtbox episode, updating it for, certain things, updating it like frame by frame. Or, again, interpolation between certain frames. If it's a longer animation with more frames, then you don't want to necessarily go frame by frame because it's a little bit overkill, but also because it does, of course, take up memory and performance. If you have to do, hundreds of these for one animation, it could be a lot. But we are going to make it today where we can change per the state we're in, okay? So you can see, like here, it's going back to the attack where we wouldn't normally want that. That's all part of what I'm talking about. All right. Now, the other thing we have to be mindful of today, and we're not going to solve it today. It's going to have its own episode because there's a lot involving it. But this dreaded capsule collider has been around for a bit now. So in Unreal, characters have a capsule collider as a root component by default. Also in Unreal, the logic for root components is that they're the ones that handle collision. So we set up these hurt boxes in the last episode, and you can see they work. And I just ended the round because the timer was up. So once we get back into it here. All right, you can see that the hurt boxes work. I can deal damage by hitting that outside box. I can't throw until I hit the throw box. And the characters don't really push each other until the push boxes are colliding. But that's actually only partially true. So the characters can push each other fine, but really one capsule collider has to collide with the other push box. As you can see, I've made the capsule collider visible. It's this little red outline that you can see. It's a little hard to tell. It's the default Unreal visibility. When it collides with the enemy's hurt box, that's when I push them, and that's when they can push me. It works fine for pushing purposes. However, we do want to adjust this because we want the hurt box to accurately represent what we're doing and how the push box works. So while the push box itself does function properly, the capsule collider actually gives us a bit of trouble. It being the root component, it's the one that handles collision presets, and we've set it up to ignore collisions with itself and the owner, so it doesn't collide with its own hurt box, but it does collide with the other hurt box, where really we only want a player's hurt box to collide with the other hurt box. Okay, so we want let me reword that. We want the player's push box to collide with the other player's push box, not really the capsule collider in the push box. And also there's a few issues with the capsule collider, just with when you jump onto them, being able to stand on their head and things like that. And I actually have a solution for that, but I'm going to group it all into one episode because I want to actually take out the capsule collider as a whole. Not necessarily remove it from the game or remove it from the character, but remove it from having any logic that has to deal with collision of our characters. So just be mindful, the capsule collider actually still is in effect here. Even though we've reduced what it gets used for, there is still one issue that it mainly has with us, and we're going to try and fix that. But that won't be for another episode, so just be mindful that if you see the push box isn't working exactly as you intend, it's not an issue with your code. Just make sure that it works when the capsule collider walks into it. We're going to adjust some collision settings in the engine code, actually, to fix this. But anyway, that's a long story short, but I wanted to tell you everything that I could to kind of get you up to speed for what I've learned throughout this, because I don't want you to think that there's any bugs or something that got missed because of those things. So what we mainly want to do today is we want to go over, and I'm going to close this, we want to go over our logic to resize all of our hurt boxes animation by animation or state by state. Again, this will probably be done frame by frame, using a database of some sort. But for now, just the fact that we have the ability to adjust everything and enable, disable them is enough. When we get data tables in with the animation data, it comes with all the hitbox data. So the hitbox data also includes the hurtbox data. Hurtboxes are just a type of hitbox. So when we have the hitbox data for every move, we will also have their corresponding hurtbox data, and that's when we can go through and make the hurtboxes change frame by frame or every couple of frames. For now, let's just get the functionality in to change them at all, and then we can read it in from the file and make it work like that. First things first, if we go to our base character BP, and actually, if you have not watched any episode of the series, I believe this is episode 90, so we're pretty far along. We still have many episodes to go, but we are doing very well. We put out an episode every single Sunday, and so I would like to link you to this iCard right here, top right corner, if you'd like to get caught up in the series. All right, otherwise, I will link the last episode we did, because the last episode is when we actually put these hurt boxes in. We had one giant hurt box before, and now we've separated based on these types. Today, we're going to be resizing and relocating and enabling and disabling them. So if you want to go over that, you probably want to see the previous episode. All right, guys. So in the previous episode, we were setting up some variables in the base character BP is begin play. And we were doing this to kind of keep track of what the default values were for the push box to resize. But now we're resizing all of the hurt boxes, and based on different things like values we give it, or in the future, data from our file that we get, or our database that we have. So we don't really want to set individual values anymore for individual boxes. We just kind of want to keep them all as a reference. So I'm getting rid of this stuff right here, which is the HB collision box, or our push box. You can see I even labeled it that. That's what we did last episode. And we were getting the scale and the location and setting these values. Well, I've gotten rid of that. You can feel free to keep it if you want, but it's a little bit redundant with how we're going to actually solve this, since we have to do it for all the hurt boxes. So I got rid of that. I then in spawn hurt boxes in set simple hurtbox details. We were doing this logic right here to basically get the children components of the mesh, make sure that it was a type of hurt box, checking the string and the name, and then if it was, we were adding it to the array. Well, now we're going to do something afterward. What we're going to really do is grab each hurt box as we add it to the array, and then set the data for it, and save it out to another array with the same index, at which point we are going to be able to access these hurt boxes from anywhere and modify their scale, their location, all that stuff. So let's hop into the code and see what we changed in here. So in fighter template character.h, if I scroll down, then I have a few new things in here that you might notice. This is for the capsule collider. It's something I've done and already finished, but I'm not ready to show off today because I'd like to I'd like to put it in with another capsule collider episode to not make things confusing. But if you scroll down to where you had your standard hurtbox scale and standard hurtbox offset, we're going to be using these just in a different way. We don't want individual variables. I'm going to make an array of a new structure that we make. So you can see I've commented out these two variables. I'm going to delete them for now because I don't need them, but I commented them out so that you could see them. So get ready to make this T array. I called it Hurtbox Defaults, and this does store all the default values of these hurt boxes. This is because we can change the hurtbox values as much as we want in the character. So that's the base character BP. We can't see anything in there. I'm actually going to make the capsule component invisible as well. There we go. If you go to the mutant BP, you can see we changed all these, remember? We made these the sizes that we want. So instead of manually typing them out or their values again, it could change per character. So we want to still keep track of the defaults. We just want to keep track of the defaults for every hurt box. Okay, so there's Hurtbox Defaults. Let me show you what this structure is. So make a new structure. I've called it Default Hurtbox Details. And what I've done is I've added an F-vector scale, F-vector offset. It's that simple. I basically just made this Hurtbox Details structure have these two variables that we know we're going to need when modifying the hurt boxes. There could be more in the future. Like if you want to change, you could throw in type and have an enum in there if you'd like. It's not really necessary for now. How we're doing it is perfectly fine. Performance-wise, it's fine, and logically, as far as I can tell right now, it's fine. We may need to update it later, but if you have this, you have your scale and your offset. Then when we have an array of this structure, each individual index or element is going to have both of these variables available to it. So make your T array of that type, fdefault hurtbox details, and I called it hurtbox defaults. Okay, I'm going to save this because I deleted the comments, but make sure you build yours and run it. So once you're here back in the engine and you've built, then we're ready to get the changes going here. So we want to go back to set simple hurtbox details, or just set hurtbox details if you took the other route that I mentioned in the previous episode where you only have one type of hurtbox. And again, the way we go through this is we get the children components and we make sure that the name of the component starts with the substring HB, or really just contains it. And that's how we know that it's a hurt box. So this element that we cast to right here off this for each loop is the hurtbox element. So once it gets to this point that's true where it adds it to the array, this same thing that gets added to the array is what we want to pull off of, and we want to get the scale and the location. You can get either the relative scale or the world scale in this case. It doesn't really matter because we're essentially working on this 2D plane where we just have we have it attached to a specific spot on the character, and then we resize it and move it based off of the offset that we give it. So it doesn't really matter if you use world or relative here. I like to use the world scale and the relative location. The relative location allows us to know when we set it back where it's going to head to as the origin, as opposed to if you left it as world scale and it goes to the origin, then it'll be, potentially way far away and not attached to your character at all. The scale doesn't really matter because, well, if it's in world space or not, they're going to be displayed in world space, so it's fine right now. All right, so either way, just get your scale and your location, just like I did. And then what we're going to want to do is make an instance of that structure so we can add it to the array. We made this Hurtbox defaults variable, but we never added anything to it. So we want to add them just as they're coming in here. So I got the world scale, I got my relative location. If I type make and I start typing the structure, make default Hurtbox Details, you can click that and it will give you everything in here that you need to make an instance of the structure. We want to give it the scale and the location that we got from this static mesh component. Remember, this is the Hurtbox. So we get the initial scale and location so that we know where to return it to once the animation is done, or we return to idle, whatever the conditions may be. You pass these in to the corresponding fields. Sometimes Unreal gives you trouble trying to delete something, and you have to compile and fix it. But anyway, and you have this output structure. So this is a structure instance that has these as its values. And that's what we want, so we want to add that to the array and keep track of it. So you should be able to just find Hurtbox Details now, or whatever you called the array. Hurtbox Defaults, I called mine. And then drag off of it, type add. Again, you don't really need an add unique here. You can if you want. However, we're adding them after one loop through. We only ever do one loop through. So we should never ever get a duplicate here. And then drag in your structure. All right. Now, also using this method, if this is the only place we ever add to this, then it won't really be a problem for us to make sure that these always match. The indices will be the same since we were doing it on the same loop iteration. If we do end up adding more hurtboxes, during certain attacks, like you get another hurtbox that spawns that could be hit, and it's not one of the ones that already exist and are resized, what we can actually do is keep track of the index then and there, add it temporarily with an instance of the Hurtbox defaults, and then remove it. So we'll never need to actually have anything in the Hurtbox defaults for ones that spawn on the fly. If it's not one that is going to be spawned and attached to the character, then it can be spawned, added to the array if necessary for collision, and then removed without ever affecting this. So that is safe. And once you are done, we're done with set simple Hurtbox Details. So now our event graph, again, we don't have all that stuff afterward. Begin play. The last thing we do is we set the caps with components, collision response to the channel as just overlap. All right, and now once you're done with that, that's one of the biggest changes that we actually have to make. Then we have to go into Modify Hurtbox, Reset Hurtbox, and fill out the logic to actually resize all of them as opposed to just the push box. The other thing you're going to need here is the NMBP and where you want to do it. For me, I've only done the crouching, but you can do this literally anywhere you want. If you want to do it during your attacks, if you want to start doing that, you can feel free to set that up. You can do it on anim notifies. You can do it on transition rule notifies. You can do it just regularly in the logic. So use it however you see fit. Okay. So for me, let's start with Modify Hurtbox. For me, what I've done is I've changed the way we had modify hurtbox. We had width, height, and offset in the past, and they do what they sound like. So you have the width and the height of the hurtbox, which are basically the Y and Z scale of that component. You also have the offset, which is for the location. And that was working fine. But we were specifically doing that on simple hurtbox array element 0. That way we always knew that we were working with the push box. Now that's a little bit different. We could do it for any hurtbox that we want. Quick note, these will always be in order even in things like standalone and packaged games. Since they are put in this order in the hierarchy, they will be in this order later. We can do additional checks if necessary, if this order could ever change, or if you want to move them around to make sure that you don't have to change all the indices. However, for now, I don't believe it will be an issue. If it ends up being an issue, again, we can easily fix it just by doing a few extra checks, or by, we could actually change around the hierarchy again to organize them in a specific manner. For now, I'm assuming that all of these are in the same order, so this will always be 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? So I don't label them or anything, I just know based off the hierarchy. However, what we're going to need to do is when we call modify hurtbox, and I'll cover this in a little bit, but when we actually call this function, we're going to need to pass the index of the hurtbox we want to change. You don't always have to change them. You could change only 1 or 2, or you could change all of them during the attack. It really depends on what you need. Every animation is unique. Literally every animation. And that's why this data is usually kept as like a separate sheet as opposed to all done in this anim notify or something like that, because you're going to have a ton of these if you're not doing this by reading a data file and parsing the data in. It is completely possible that you want to do that, or that works for you because you don't need your hurtboxes so precise, all these different things. So if you feel like working through that, that is perfectly fine. Be my guest. I respect it. But we're going to come up with a much easier way when we get through the data table stuff, so I would just hold on for that. However, let's make sure that we have our logic working before that point. So, on modify hurtbox, I've added 2 new input parameters. I've added isActive and index. You can click this little plus new parameter here to add them. I made index an integer and isActive a boolean. So isActive determines if it's going to be there at all. If it's not there at all, what I actually do is I set the world scale 3D to be 0 everything. You could toggle the visibility and all this stuff, but really, if we just set the scale to be 0, it can never be hit anyway. There can be no collision with it. It's still visible, so we don't have to worry about setting it back to visible when we want it to pop up, which is one less call that we need to do. We're already going to be resizing it anyway. And it just basically makes it so that it's out of the way with as little work necessary. So if you have isActive here, like I did, just add a branch right off of that. If it's false, I set the world scale of the array. Okay, understand, I get the array at this index now. This before, we had this in the previous episodes, but this was 0. See if I can do something like that. Clean it up a little bit for you. This was 0 before. What we want is the index that gets passed in is the one that we're setting the scale of. And same here too. You can see index gets passed in. This get is the only one we have. So we always want to use this get. Otherwise, if it's true that it is an active hurtbox, then we do the same logic that we were doing in the previous episode. 0.05 is my hard-coded value. It's basically my hurtbox depth value, or basically the value that it goes into the background or foreground, which we don't ever want that or need that to change. But the Y and the Z, the width and the height, do need to change. So just pass them along like we have been. This is also something that we did in the prior episode, but just to recap, we also take the relative location of the hurtbox, add the offset to it, and set that to the new location. So we were able to set the location previously. However, we weren't actually using the offset to add to it. That way we could reposition it. We were basically just setting the scale. So now you can see it in action. If we get this simple hurtbox array at that index, drag off of it and grab relative location. Okay. Then you do vector plus vector. So drag off the relative location, do a plus sign, vector plus vector. Your offset should be a vector. You had offset in here in the past. So it was just, we disconnected it temporarily, but it should be a vector. If it's not, you can update it now. Pass in the vector as the other thing in that add. And then that result goes into set relative location as the new location. So you can drag off of the component once more. Okay. Drag the new location in, and you're good. You don't want to check sweep or teleport here. Doesn't really matter. Sweep is to determine if there is going to be a collision beforehand, and it will actually stop you. But we don't want that. It's if we have a collision, that means we've landed a hit, so no reason to do that. Teleport in this case is basically it'll just literally teleport and deal with physics differently. Nothing we really care about for the hurtboxes. So you can leave them both unchecked. That's what modify hurtbox looks like. Now we also want reset hurtbox. Let's do this before we get into the NMBP. I'll just knock these out. So reset hurtbox was basically the same strat, where what we did is we actually got the simple hurtbox array at index 0, and we set it to be the world scale 3D of the initial values. But now we have to do this for everything. So what I've done is I've gotten my simple hurtbox array. I did for each loop with break off of it. I don't actually use the break in this case. I have an idea that could be used for it later to save us some time when parsing these hurtboxes, but it's not necessary right now, so you can just do a regular for each loop if you want. Either way, off the for each loop, we take the element, so each individual hurtbox. And what we want to do is set the world scale 3D and the relative location again, like we did a modify hurtbox, but we want to set them back to their default values. So in the previous episode, what we were doing is taking the offset and scale variables that we had and setting these nodes. However, what we can do now is loop through all the hurtboxes, loop through the hurtbox details array, and use those defaults. Okay, so when you do a for each loop, whether it's the one with break or not, you get this array index on the right side. This is the array index that we're currently on. This is the element, this is the index that it's at. Remember, we set up our hurtbox defaults to match our simple hurtbox array. So the array index that this is looping through is going to be the index we want to grab the defaults from. So if you grab your hurtbox defaults, drag off of it and type get. I got a reference in this case, but you could actually do a copy. Drag in the array index. Drag off of it and type break. It'll break default hurtbox details, and you'll get your two variables, scale and offset. In this case, what I do is I drag off the array element, type set world scale 3D, and I drag in the scale. Then you can imagine I drag off of the array element and type set relative location, and I grab the offset and set that as the new location. Since this is looping through, this is going to do this for every hurtbox, and it's going to reset all their values. Okay. So, when we go into our NMBP, or wherever it is that you're going to be modifying your hurtboxes, let's look at how these calls work. I'm doing this on my resize the crouching hurtbox, which gets called, I believe, on the animation transition to the crouch. However, it doesn't really matter where it gets called, to be honest. It's just more the fact of, as long as you know where it gets called, so that it works for every scenario you have. In this case, this is more just a test to make sure that it works with the crouching. That way we know the system works as a whole. So, resizing the crouching hurtbox, again, when we want to change the hurtboxes for crouch. What I've decided on is I grab the character reference, which we already had because we were calling modify hurtbox once for the push box. So you'll have one here, but you'll have new variables is active here and index here. Make sure you change these all to what you want. So 0 is our push box. So this is the one for the yellow Hurtbox that you see. I set it to be is active so that we know that it's going to be visible and able to be used in the game. And then the index is to grab that, and here are all the values for it. Then I still have the character reference. You can see I have these reroute nodes up above, and I call modify Hurtbox again. I grab index 1 and get width, height, and scale, well, offset. It is active. 2 is active, so this is high. This is mid. This is actually the throw because they're a little bit out of order. I tried to go actually off the order of top to bottom, but the collision box was also the most important and the initial one that was in there, so I left that at 0. So it's a little bit confusing. You could probably organize it better to be like either top to bottom or collision, low, mid, high, throw, something like that. But either way, remember 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 3 is my throw. 4 I've set to not be active when crouching. That's why I only have those 2 green hurt boxes, the throw box and the push box, because the low hurt box is not active, so its scale gets set to 0. So you could set all this stuff to 0 if you wanted. I actually copied the modify hurt box node so it has values in it, but it doesn't really make a difference. It being inactive will just automatically set these things for you, so the node itself doesn't really matter. But if it makes you feel better, feel free to change these values just so that you're aware, if someone's reading it, it's a little bit more visible. Okay? And so set these as you'd like. In the future, we'll make a function for this that's going to loop through, determine which hurt boxes are being resized, and then it's going to, resize them and offset them. Set the ones that are active and inactive, spawn new ones if needed, all that stuff. For now, we're not reading anything from the data table or a database, so I can do as many of this as I want before I decide to make a function. All right, guys, so that's actually pretty much all you need to do, and you can resize all the hurt boxes in your game. Again, you'll be able to resize them, frame by frame or as often or as little as you'd like manually, but I would highly recommend just waiting until we have other logic in to work with data tables. We're going to have a master sheet, and pretty much all fighting games and all platform fighters, and in fact, pretty much all games have this information. Someone like a game designer or technical designer often will go in and they will fill out all this data, beta testing, QA, all this stuff will come together. They'll fill in all this data for what feels right, what looks right, and then you'll know, just update this sheet. We are going to write a function, or quite a few functions, to parse the data from that sheet and then know exactly what logic we want when we move or perform certain animations. And that will basically finish off hurt boxes. At this point, we are good. I mean, even the capsule collision that we are going to be fixing, it's not really tied to the hurt boxes in any way. It's just the default part of Unreal that we kind of have to work around. The other thing we'll be doing with hurt boxes, and it's not specific to hurt boxes, is the render depth. So we need to change where things render. Like right now, the hurt boxes are in the centers of the character. I mentioned this last episode. Really, they should be like in front of the character, rendering on top of the character. Same with when the characters jump. They need to jump in front of the HUD, not behind it. This is all stuff that deals with render depth, so we'll cover that. And that will also deal with the hurt boxes, but again, pretty much independent. So I think at this point, I'm very, very satisfied with our hurtbox system. All right, guys, and that's pretty much it. That's all I got for today's episode. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for me and the channel than anything else you can do. I just really appreciate it. Thank you so much. If you had any issues with this tutorial, or any of my tutorials, this series or not, feel free to join the Discord community. We'll be happy to help you out for free. I want to give a huge, huge shout out to all my Patreon members and YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys so much for continuing to support me in this series. I really, really hope you guys enjoy it. I love getting to update you guys every single week with the progress that we've made. Alright guys, and that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.